Securing elections or voter suppression? Ahead on Face the State, depends who you ask. The SAVE Act now goes to the U.S. Senate after passing the House. The goal to keep non-citizens from voting. But will it make voting more challenging for Americans? We hear from critics and supporters. Also, we're talking with Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, his take on the SAVE Act, plus his recent testimony before Congress and efforts to give Ohioans more information about elections as we get closer to the May vote. Plus, watching the latest developments out of Washington, D.C., my one-on-one interview with Republican Congressman Mike Carey, why he supports extending the Trump tax cuts, and what he has in the works that he says will help working Ohioans. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. A major change to the way people register to vote passed the U.S. House of Representatives. The SAVE Act would require you to prove your citizenship in person to register to vote in federal elections. SAVE stands for the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. This week, I heard from supporters and critics of the bill. Under the SAVE Act, those wanting to register to vote would have to show documents in person that prove their U.S. citizenship, such as a birth certificate or U.S. passport. The goal is to prevent non-citizens from voting. The U.S. House passed the bill Thursday.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 208. The bill is passed without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
It now goes to the Senate, where Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno is a co-sponsor.
It's long overdue. It's going to clean up our elections and give, most importantly, people faith and confidence in our elections.
Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose said in a statement, "I'm hopeful the SAVE Act will create a sense of urgency in lawfully providing states with the federal records we need to maintain accurate voter rolls, particularly when it comes to citizenship status." But critics say it will make it harder to vote. They point to the millions of women and men who have changed their names after getting married.
This would mean having to ensure that your birth certificate and your passport match the information that you're providing, whether driver's license or otherwise.
Beth Link with When We All Vote also has concerns about people having a birth certificate or passport on hand.
I think many people, whether in your immediate family or in your extended network, can think of some folks that may not have access to those documents readily.
I think it's extremely important that you have to show valid government-issued ID when you go vote. You need that for everything else.
The bill does not affect the upcoming May election, of course.
Please don't skip this election because every election matters.
But Jen Miller with the League of Women Voters of Ohio worries about the impact in the next federal election in 2026.
Physically getting into the Board of Elections can be hard for seniors, people with disabilities, students, active duty military families that are overseas.
Voters we talked to think the current system works well.
So if somebody come out and tell me that the system is broke, then maybe I might consider it. But right now, I don't think it's broke.
I think it's an effort to control voting. That's what it is. It's to try to block as many people as possible for voting.
The House passed the same bill last year, but it died in the Senate, where they'll try again this year. We reached out to other U.S. lawmakers from Ohio about the SAVE Act. In a statement sent to 10 TV, Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Batty said House Republicans' extreme voter suppression bill, the SAVE Act, doesn't save anything. Instead, it seeks to silence the voices of millions of Americans, especially women, people of color, and low-income communities, by making it harder to vote. Congressman Mike Kerry wrote, "The SAVE Act makes American elections more secure, protects Americans' ballots, and promotes greater confidence in the system." Kerry also told me there are provisions in the bill addressing the concerns about name changes not matching birth certificates. We'll hear from him later in the show. Joining me now to discuss the SAVE Act and other election issues is Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here today.
Great to be back, Doug. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again. Well, first of all, just why do you support the SAVE Act?
It's common sense, and it's unfortunate that this sort of fear-mongering from the sky is falling, Chicken Little crowd is in the news right now. They're doing the same thing they did when Ohio mandated photo ID. They said it's going to be the end of free elections in Ohio. Of course, it didn't play out that way. Actually, we've seen increased voter participation since Ohio started requiring a photo ID. Same thing with the SAVE Act. It's common sense legislation to make sure that only American citizens vote in our elections. Now, some people say, well, that's already the law. It is already the law. This is about enforcement. This is about making sure that we can enforce that law. And one of the things that's not getting enough conversation from the SAVE Act is that it will make federal databases more available to us so that we can actually get the data we need to make sure that only American citizens are registered.
You always say Ohio elections are the gold standard in transparency, integrity, security. So why is this needed then if it's so good right now?
Well, I mean, we're always working to get better. Last year alone, we were able to identify hundreds of non-citizens that had tried to register to vote and remove them. Hundreds out of the 8 million registered voters is a small number. But we're not going to rest until we make our voter rolls as perfect as we can. And this is just the next iteration in continuing to protect our elections. Listen, voter integrity drives participation. People that know that their elections are honest want to participate in them. And the irresponsible rhetoric from people that are spreading this false fear, these really ugly lies about the SAVE Act, it's irresponsible because that's what causes people not to want to participate.
But what about the concerns about, the names matching on the birth certificate and now, and then also having to show proof in person to register?
It's a complete exaggeration. So what we do in Ohio works really well, and the SAVE Act would make it better. What we do is we verify your citizenship based on your state ID or your driver's license number. If, for example, you're one of the very small percentage that doesn't have a state ID or doesn't have a driver's license, then we would require you to come in person to verify your citizenship. But most of us, we created that record of our citizenship when we got our state ID or our driver's license, and for 98% of us, that would continue to be the case.
So if you're registered already,
of course,
it won't affect. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, you recently testified before the U.S. House Administration Committee. Was that kind of hand in hand with the SAVE Act, the same issues?
I think this is my third time going to testify in front of House Admin, and part of this is that those members of Congress recognize how Ohio is such a gold standard leader in elections administration. That's why they invited us to do it. But yeah, it was a look ahead to what changes may be coming in 2025 and 2026, but it was also a look back on 2024. And the chairwoman of that committee wanted to ask states like Ohio, how is it that you all do it so well when other states continue to struggle?
Moving on from that, you recently announced new data dashboards that are posted on the Secretary of State's website. Last year, I believe it was last October or so, you rolled out the early voting dashboard that could show people where the numbers were stacking up county by county, statewide, Republican, Independent, Democrat. Now you've got two new ones that have come out. Tell me about those and the reason behind them.
Yeah, this is part of our work following the Data Act passage in Ohio and the creation of our Data Analytics Office. I was the first Secretary of State in America to create an Office of Data Analytics, and they have been hard at work really taking all of this election data that exists that we pull in from each of our county boards of elections and putting it in a user-friendly graphic way where people can look at it and know what's happening with their elections. You can find all of this at ohiosos.gov, ohiosos.gov/data. And there are more to come because we're working on trying to make sure that Ohio's elections are the most transparent in the country.
And the current ones that you just rolled out are about election history, like
Correct.
results history over the years, and then also registrations currently. Now, registration for this election is closed now, but why those two topics?
Well, again, those were the ones that we were able to get together first. I think that they were maybe most relevant to people as well. As you know, we're deep into the early voting period for the May 6th election. You can look on there and see how many people have voted, how many people have requested an absentee ballot. You can look at it by county. That's interesting information. Voter registration, also important. And then the one that we just recently introduced this week, which is election history, you can look back over the last few years and see trends. Political scientists and normal citizens are interested in looking at this to see, how are voting trends shaping politics in certain regions of the state or statewide as well.
I was at the Franklin County Board of Elections a couple times recently, and I was there several times, of course, during the presidential election. And there's just such a vast contrast in voter turnout. It was in the hundreds after the first week of this coming up May primary special election. First day for the presidential election, just in Franklin County, it was like 4,300. Does it distress you that turnout is so low? And I know it's not really fair to compare a presidential election to this one.
I always say we won't rest until we have 100% turnout. So that means we won't rest. But the fact is that those even numbered years when we elect governors and U.S. senators and presidents tend to get the most attention. It's talked about on TV and in the media. Unfortunately, when we get to those odd numbered years like 2025, when we do really important elections like municipal elections for mayors and city councils and local offices. We have a statewide issue right now for infrastructure investment in Ohio. And so these are things that really impact your daily life, but a lot of people just don't think about them. They don't hear about them. And so unfortunately, those elections often do fly below the radar, but that's why we're working to spread the word. Listen, it matters who lives in the White House. We all know that. But what also matters probably more is who works at the courthouse or the schoolhouse or city hall. Those are the kind of elections that we're having right now. And as much as we have shattered records in those even numbered years like 20, 22, and 24, you're right. The numbers tend to be low in those odd numbered years.
Yeah, obviously, there is a lot more media focus on those big federal elections, the national elections and things. But you touched on it here, but these are decisions being made that do affect people's daily lives on the local level.
Yeah. And so here's a pro tip. I run into people all the time that say, hey, I'm not going to vote this year. I don't vote in elections that are non-presidential elections. And I always want to know why. I want to sort of get to the root of that. Oftentimes, it's some version of, I just don't know enough. I'm not informed enough. And people don't want to guess. Here's the pro tip, though. In Ohio, you don't have to guess. You can request your absentee ballot. It'll get mailed to your house. You can sit there at your own kitchen table. And when you vote by mail from home, you're allowed to cheat on the test. You can actually flip open your laptop. You can call a friend. You can take 20 minutes, the time it would take you to organize your sock drawer.
Do some research.
And fill out a really informed ballot and mail it in and then track it at voteohio.gov/track so that you know it arrived at the Board of Elections.
And you can also find your sample ballot, your particular sample ballot pretty easily on the website as
right
well.
there at voteohio.gov.
All right. Secretary LaRose, thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug.
Well, still ahead. One-on-one with 15th District Congressman Mike Carey. We talk about some of the big issues of the day, including tariffs, taxes, and potential cuts to Medicaid. Plus, what he's working on that he believes will help older and working Ohioans. This week, I caught up with Republican 15th District Congressman Mike Carey for a wide-ranging interview. We talked about President Trump's tariffs, a bill to require you to show proof of citizenship to register to vote, two bills he's co-sponsoring to help seniors and working families, and the recently passed House budget resolution that sets the parameters for spending and cuts as the House negotiates with the Senate. I started by asking about the budget, extending the Trump tax cuts, and concerns about Medicaid cuts.
That's going to be up to the committees of jurisdiction. I mean, we just basically set a baseline number and we set a top line number. So what we of the committees of jurisdiction have to do is, as it relates to, the president has made some priorities. He wants to make sure that there are no taxes on tips. He wants to make sure there's no taxes on overtime. He would like to make TCJA permanent. But I think given the numbers that we have to deal with, I think making TCJA permanent is going to be difficult to do. We just simply don't have the numbers there.
What does TCJ stand for?
Well, this is the Jobs and Tax Cut Act. Okay. This is Trump's signature piece of legislation, and that's what we're trying to extend in reconciliation. So those are the things that we are going to be working as soon as we get back. We've been working on it for quite some time. We just needed to have the instructions from the budget resolution as to what the number would be.
Why do you think it's so important to continue the 2017 tax cuts?
Well, listen, if we do nothing, I think the average American will see their taxes go up by 22%. I mean, that's a fact of the matter. We have a lot of things that we have to address. I think part of the big pay for was the SALT deduction, which are state and local taxes. Really important to the folks in New York, really important to the people in California and Chicago. I just did a bipartisan tour with Brad Schneider in Chicago. He came into Columbus a couple of weeks ago. Talking to those people, their taxes are really high. Now, it may not affect Central Ohio so much, but when you're putting a bill together, these are the things that we have to address. But I think the bottom line is just people are concerned about expensing, child tax cuts. There are a lot of R&D expensing, things that a lot of the small businesses and large businesses here in Central Ohio have talked to me about. So we got to get this done. We've got to do it in a fundamental way that we can make sure that we have the votes to get it out of the House.
There's been some concern raised. In fact, yesterday, a couple Democratic representatives and union members raised concerns about the possibility of cuts to Medicaid.
Not going to happen.
Tell me about that.
I think the president has been very clear. He does not want to touch Medicaid, and a lot of people, Medicaid and Medicare, they think of as synonymous, but it's not. But there's, we're not looking to cut Medicaid. The president has been very clear with that. He doesn't want to hurt any of the social services. So I think, people are raising this because they're seeing a number. I think there's a lot of other things that could be going on in terms of spending reductions. But Medicaid is, I think there's a number of not just Democrats, but a lot of Republicans. I think there was a letter that came out from 12 Republicans that are not on the Ways and Means Committee or the E&C Committee, but many Republicans are saying, listen, we're not going to touch Medicaid. And you got to realize we have a very slim majority in the House. So you got to make sure that not only do you take care of, all of the constituencies within the conference, but when you have 12 members sending a letter saying no Medicaid cuts, I just don't think that's going to happen.
What's your stance on the current situation with tariffs as it stands now, particularly this back and forth and the raising of tariffs between the U.S. and China?
Yeah, well, listen, I think the China thing is one thing. I mean, because you got to look at what they've done with fentanyl over the years and what they've done to our country and the trade policy. I was glad to see the president take a 90-day pause. I think when we signed our crypto bill into law last Thursday, which was the first crypto piece of legislation that's ever passed the Senate and the House bipartisanly. But I had the chance to be in the Oval Office with the president. The president was talking. He's had over 60 countries that have already reached out to him. And again, I think he's using the tariff, as long as he's using it as a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer, which is what I think he's doing. I think the negotiation process will take place. Listen, we've been taken advantage of for many, many years. Workers over the course of 10 years or 15 years, I forget what the number is, over 90,000 factories in the United States have closed. These are things the president ran on. And so I think that what he's doing with tariffs it's the right move at the right time. And hopefully he can negotiate a better deal.
The SAVE Act passed recently, requiring people to show proof of citizenship when registering to vote. You've shown your support for it in a statement.
Yeah.
Why do you support it?
Well, this is something that I think should be very clear. I mean, if you're not a citizen, you shouldn't be able to vote. And, there were provisions that were made for somebody that may have recently gotten married, changed the name and all those things. I think it's a great bill. I mean, it's passed before and we passed it again. So I think voters need to make sure that the election process is secure. And I think the SAVE Act is one step in the right direction. So that's why I supported it. And I supported it the last time it came up before the House. And so I think it's a very good bill.
Sounds like there's a lot of concern, though, about what you mentioned, whether people would find it difficult to register if they are married and they've changed their names. And there's also
there were provisions in there that made sure that wouldn't happen. So again, if anybody has any problems, they can reach out to our office. But there were provisions within the legislation that made sure that wouldn't happen.
On April 1st, Congressman Kerry joined one Republican and two Democratic lawmakers in introducing the CARE Act. It would allow seniors on Medicare to receive at-home emergency medical treatment for minor incidents without having to go to the emergency room.
Why do you think that's important?
Well, listen, I think you got to provide for our seniors and got to give them the best tools that they possibly can. You don't want them to have to just go to an emergency room. So this has seemed... to be honest with you, I couldn't believe that this wasn't in place, to be honest with you. And so this is something that we've working bipartisanly, allow our seniors to have the opportunity to not just have to go to the emergency room. So again, I think it's a bipartisan bill. Can't believe that we're having to do it now. I thought it should have been done years ago.
Is this about saving them money or saving Medicare money for not having to take those trips?
No, I think it's just about giving seniors a better opportunity for care instead of having to just go to an emergency room.
Representative Kerry is also a co-sponsor of the bipartisan Credit for Caring Act. It would provide a tax credit of up to $5,000 for working family caregivers.
You know, when you have somebody that's at home, the expenses that you incur, a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, you want to be able to keep your loved one at home as much as possible. It gives them just a little wiggle room. And that's why the AARP is 100% supportive of it. It's something, again, I know 5,000 doesn't do everything, but it helps. And we want to have people to be able to be at home with their loved ones, providing that care.
And Congressman Carey says they'll be able to focus more on those bills after the budget negotiations. Coming up next on Face the State, a focus on housing and public safety. Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther talks about the successes of the previous year and lays out his vision for the next. We'll break down his State of the City address. Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther gave his State of the City address Wednesday night. He focused on several topics, including housing and public safety. 10 TV's Carly Dion breaks down the highlights of the mayor's message and what community members are saying about progress and challenges in the city.
If you ask Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther, he'll tell you the state of the city is strong and growing rapidly.
How lucky are we that this time in our city's history, we get to lead and shape the future of this incredible place.
And those in attendance believe the future of the city is full of opportunities.
That's really about renewing the American dream.
The American dream, something many are struggling to attain when the cost of nearly everything has gone up, making it difficult to achieve goals like owning a home, something Mayor Ginther hopes to help.
Consider the numbers. From 2010 to 2020, our region built one new home for every 2.5 jobs that we created.
Ginther's goal moving forward is to create at least one house for every new job created in the region. Over the next 10 years, he says 200,000 housing units need to be created just to meet demand. Wednesday night, he pledged Columbus to bring 100,000 of them to the market.
He's leading from the front saying, I'll take half of that commitment. That's leading with action.
Ginther also calling on voters to help, proposing a $500 million bond on the ballot to support affordable housing. Another challenge the community continues to address is public safety, but Ginther says significant efforts were made to reduce crime last year.
Homicides dropped by 17%. Felonious assaults were down 25%.
One thing that I connected today is how important all of the factors surfaces back to city safety.
While the city sees some success in some areas, the data shows domestic violence cases are increasing.
In the first quarter of this year, there were 12 homicides in our city. 5 of them were connected to domestic violence.
Ginther says it will take a community effort to address this problem.
Domestic violence is so challenging because it's silent.
But Ginther says the Office of Violence Prevention is working on new initiatives in partnership with shelters to find solutions, all in an effort to allow the city of Columbus to thrive in every aspect, which takes a village.
We don't want to just be bigger, we want to be better. And I think a city that is a city of opportunity, and preserving that as we get bigger is going to be harder to do.
That was Carly Dion reporting. Toward the end of his speech, Mayor Ginther also announced his goal of making Columbus the nation's capital for women's sports and inspiring more young girls to get involved with sports in the community. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you back here next Sunday at 11:30.